Good evening, welcome to Plain Talk. My name is Christopher Ram. Thank you for joining me for the next hour as I discuss with my special guests the topic women in politics. The guests this evening are Ms. Rondha Ann Lam, presidential candidate of Citizenship Initiative, and Ms. Mishka Puran, prime ministerial candidate of Change Guyana. Ladies, women, welcome to Plain Talk.
Thanks for having us.
Wow, that's unison. Politics in Guyana, politics generally, is seen as a man's world. Do you share that perception?
I don't think generally, no, it's not a man's world, but I think in Guyana you haven't seen a lot of women step up in the political arena to make any sort of meaningful contribution to policy making, etc. I don't think we've seen that. I don't know what.
What's your view?
One of the things I've noticed over the years is that we have actually been pandered to by a list system. You know, there's a certain amount of women that we have to put on the list, and so what we've seen in the past is political parties tend to follow that list.
Yeah.
So they produce a list that has 1/3 women for the constitutional requirements.
But I'm going slightly beyond it,
Yes.
just the politics, no, generally.
Yes, no.
I think they hold only token positions.
Correct.
That's my
Yes.
take on it.
I have to agree with that. You know, we've had one female president, and she faced a lot of opposition. We moved past that, and we came into the positions of where, in the last elections, we had a female prime ministerial candidate from the big parties.
Yes.
But when we talk about those groundbreaking, you know, I'm not praying and hoping that I'm going to see a female presidential candidate from either of the two larger parties anytime soon. What we've seen instead in 2020 is this push for the smaller parties who are actually doing the groundbreaking aspects. You know, Mishka as a prime ministerial candidate,
Your
myself as PC,
Dr.
you know,
Leong.
Dr. Leong. In fact, Ms. Jordan is PRP's presidential candidate, and then you have Dr. Ashiki Soon as well.
Yes, yes.
So it is the small parties who've really stepped into the arena and pushed this concept of, you know, actual female women leaders in that sense.
Elections have been on the cards since November 2018,
Yes.
when the motion of no confidence was tabled in the National Assembly. What triggered your deciding, look, I am going to get involved? Because it took some time for your names to come up in the forefront of leadership.
I don't think that particularly that was a reason that motivated me to get involved. I mean, it's one reason. Of course, you can't just ignore what the Constitution says. That's very off-putting to me. But I think generally neither of the two parties that have governed us have really put their hearts into doing what's best for the Guyanese people. And that's what motivated me to enter into this political arena. I really had no plans on fighting for power, etc. But you can't just sit by on the sidelines and watch your country fall apart. Every single system that we have in place, if you can call it system, they don't work. And as a Guyanese, I'd like to move around my country, and if I want to get the simplest task done, I don't expect to have 100 hurdles there before I can get it done.
Well, let me ask you, as an attorney at law, you would have followed the Granger administration's response to the no confidence motion. As an attorney at law, what are your thoughts on that response? And does it bother you that the National Assembly was ignored?
Well, you know, it does bother me. I wouldn't mince my words. It does bother me. You have a constitution there that, and the problem is a lot of the persons who sit in parliament are in fact attorneys. So it really bothers me that they would completely ignore the constitution altogether and then come up with all of the excuses not to honor the no confidence motion. I can't put butter or gloss over what was done.
Was that a setback for democracy in your view?
You know, well, yes and no, because you know, being a lawyer, I know that there's always the appeal process, and it's as of right. So Yes, I would say that it is a setback generally, but because of I know that the processes are in place, I would have to honor those processes.
So Ms. Lam, why did you decide to get into this? What was the trigger?
My trigger was the education system. I have spent 21 years. I'm a career teacher in that sense, and I looked at simple systems that which catered, the lack of equity among schools, the quality of teachers we were producing from various systems. In terms of, I'm talking here more specifically about how we monitor them after they would have qualified and placed in the system. We have no additional criteria, for instance, relicensing or checking to see to ensure that they're keeping current with new procedures and things like that. And one of the things for me was that grade 6 exam, which every year I watched little ones, their heart broken because they didn't get Queen's College, and I experienced it with my
And bishops.
and I experienced it with my own children, where, for instance, my boy had 91% and my girl had 92%, and that wasn't good enough. And so, because I'm a teacher in a system, I was able to work and to build their motivation. We're working towards a percentage. If you get that, great, but it's a percentage. But there's something wrong with a system that's telling children who are in their 90s, 92, 93,
Yeah.
even in the 80s, that this is not good enough. And then we have these labels attached to these schools, and ultimately what ends up happening is a large swath of the population of children get into those schools and they feel dejected. I see the tears every year. So there were a number of things that I wanted changed in the education system. When I joined TCI, it was to assist with education. TCI, our party. It was to assist in the education policy. At no point did I ever imagine that I would be its presidential candidate. The conversation when we went to the voting, it happened in September. And when we launched in October, we said, all right, we're going to choose the best presidential candidate from among the group. So I'm there with my little pen and paper, and and I'm making notes. Oh, this person is strong in that and that person. And so when we went, after we launched and we said, we're starting to look around for a PC, I said, great, I have a running list of people who I'd want. And then we went to the elections. Mm-hmm. And one name popped up. And I looked around and I said, all right. And then all the yays rolled up. And I said, what is this? And they said, we've been looking at you for months, in terms of that. And even then, I said, absolutely not. We're not ready for...
Were you reluctant?
Initially, it wasn't so much reluctance in stepping into that arena, so to speak, but it was more of what was best for TCI. Would the public be responsive to a woman?
And has the public been?
Yes, absolutely. I've actually been pleasantly surprised in that sense.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the public has been generally very accepting of both Rhonda and myself, and in fact pushing us forward. If you look at the reviews,
yes,
I think it's a change that they wanted.
Mind you, you take the criticism, the good with the bad. So as equal as the positives have been, the criticisms have been there. You take it. It's a learning experience for you. But I've not experienced anything that I would say was daunting or off-putting in terms of entering this field.
Do you believe that having women in political leadership conducive to better governance, and if so, how?
Of course. I mean, anyone that grew up with their mother would agree, right? Governance starts from the home. And it can that same type of management skill. It's a skill that you acquire, I guess, from birth. That kind of management skill, taking that into parliament and into the government, it's not a hard stretch of the imagination. It's not a big leap. And I think men are good
Thank you.
going forward in the battleground, fighting, I think, a little bit more than women, fighting in a political arena with amongst themselves. But I think women are more strategic.
Men got too much egos.
Yes.
The men in politics, too much egos drive them?
I think so. I think women are a little bit more strategic and issue-based. And that's what's lacking for me.
for me, it's a similar process, but I'll take it a little step further. What I found with female politicians is that we tend to, for the most part, for me, I'm talking specifically
Sure.
here at this point. I tend to look at an issue. I look at pros. I look at cons. I try to see the best in either side, and where I can put together, an amalgamation of those ideas and concepts. That's what I work for. What I've seen, and Mishka would have hinted at this first, there is an aggression that tends to come from male politicians that you don't always find in female politicians for two reasons. One, if we're ever aggressive, it's off-putting for persons. So we've had to literally maneuver through.
Yeah, she behaving like a man.
Correct. We've had to literally maneuver through a field where we've had not only obstacles of the positions we've taken, but we're also facing a secondary barrier, which is our gender.
Yes.
And so ultimately, we've learned, and this is not just in politics, this is every other field, business. I've spoken to female CEOs and things like that. There are certain things that you can't do as a woman. So we've had to learn to navigate and bypass those systems, and so that makes us, in that sense, we're less likely to be volatile because we've had the volatility thrown and pelted at us in many instances.
You have to be guarded because you'll be dubbed as emotional.
Correct. And that as well.
And once you're dubbed as emotional, that will never come off of you. It's like a stain.
Agreed.
And there's no room for that in politics.
You mentioned earlier about women in politics. We've had Janet Jagan, probably the most high profile because she was the president. But whether including or barring Janet Jagan, which woman in politics in Ghana, throughout the history of politics, that you had Winifred Gaskin comes to mind, Philip Jane Gay, Fireball Shuri,
Philomena.
Philomena.
Yes.
Who would you say is you admire as a woman politician in Ghana?
I would think perhaps Sheila Chapman. I definitely admire Priya Manik-Chan. I think she's always out there in the front lines fighting, even though I don't agree with the policies of her party, but I definitely think that she shows really good leadership. Gail Teixeira. Those are the persons I would say like are contemporaries right now that go out there and impress me as a woman with what the quality of work and the lengths they're willing to go to push forward their own ideology.
You mentioned Ms. Priya Manik-Chan.
Yes.
And I think, like you, I think she has been a superb minister. She does her homework. That issue at the July the 4th outburst, you think society has forgiven her, and is that lack of forgiveness because of her gender?
Well, I don't think...
You know the incident
Yeah,
I'm talking
I
about?
do.
Yeah.
I don't think that the lack of... Well, I think society needs to move beyond that. Really, you can't judge a person by one act. You will have to look at her based on everything that she's done in her career. You can't look at her for one act. But I don't think that it has so much to do with her gender as it has to do with where it occurred.
Judgment.
Judgment,
Yes.
because it's like that was an untouchable place.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think
How
that's
dare
why
we.
right, and that's why a lot of Guyanese still hold up hard and fast against her. But I think her career as a politician goes way beyond that.
Who would you select as your...
When I became PC, I had a long list of women that I mentioned in my acceptance speech, so to speak. I talked about people like Jessie Burnham, Mrs. J. Gunn. So for me, it isn't a singular female politician. I even talked about contemporary. We had
which is what Michigan just
right.
said, yes.
So people like Miss Manik-Chan. You had people like Tabitha Sarabo Hali from the current coalition government, as well as another young lady that I'm quite enthused about her, and I'm glad to see her now stepping up in terms on the coalition stage as well. This is Miss McAllister. So for me, it's almost as if I've taken a little bit of everyone and I've merged this ideal that I'm working towards in terms of this stateswoman that I'm, propelling myself onto this stage. So it isn't just one singular person for me. I like the idea of a formidable woman, but as Mishka said earlier, there's certain things that we can't do as female, as female politicians. We're going to be judged forever and ever about it. The idea of Miss Malik Chand, raging in this feral blast that we termed it. Again, it was this. I jumped initially, but then I thought, wow, because we'd never seen that from a male politician.
Yeah.
It's always this kind of. But then she was judged harshly for it. How dare she? They used very derogatory terms for her. But again, I don't think it was because it was a female. I think it was, like Mishka said, where it was.
Yeah.
And we didn't know our place, and therefore, how dare we try to create a diplomatic faux pas at this point, this critical juncture and these kinds of things. So I think it was more that than anything else.
What are the critical women's issues that most arouse your passion? I know you're a dispassionate person, Michelle. I know you
Yes.
as a lawyer. And what have you done about those things in the past?
Well, I think,
Just a couple of the things that really have.
well,
Arouse
number one,
you.
I think would be the issue of sexual harassment. That really upsets me, that it even holds any place in today's society. A lot hasn't been done countrywide to curb this sort of behavior. A lot of people are bypassed, women are bypassed altogether because they're not willing to do what is necessary to climb the corporate ladder. A lot of women aren't willing, unfortunately, to take it to the court because they don't want their stories out and they feel that they will be victimized or marginalized in future endeavors. So there wasn't a lot that you could do except try to counsel them and say, perhaps you need to branch out on your own and that sort of thing. And then, of course, there's the issue of domestic violence, which is like a plague in this country. And I'm not sure if it's a woman's issue. I know they like to say it's a woman's issue, but it's not women perpetrating violence against women. I think
Yes.
you need to have
That's a good distinction indeed.
So it's not really a woman's issue. It's the country's issue. There needs to be grassroots education. I think men need to be pulled on the side and taught that this isn't appropriate behavior. This isn't how you should treat your wife or your daughter. And for women, I think they need to know that there are mechanisms where they can step away from this abusive relationship. And the problem here, and nobody has been offering it, yes, you have help and shelter, etc., but governments haven't been stepping in to give better facilities for women to walk out, women without means. So if a woman has children, where's she going to go? More than likely she goes to her parents' home, she gets a few days with them, and they send her back because ultimately they don't want to keep the problem with them. But I think we need to have some sort of housing facility for women who are the victims of domestic violence. I think they need to have stronger sensitization of the police. When you go in, they say, oh, that's a man and woman's story, we're not handling it. The court has, I think as of July or August, they've implemented where you can go directly to the court and file your application and bypass the system. But that is only for people who know of it.
Yeah. But how does being prime ministerial candidate and good luck to you that you get into parliament, how would you address that problem?
Well, you see, being the candidate gives me a platform that I didn't have before, right? So I'm now able to reach a wider audience. You're helping me by inviting me here.
It's my pleasure, and I'm sure my the
to
guests
get
and
to a
viewers
wider
like
audience,
this.
so that women can be empowered and they can know what remedies are available to them. So that's what I think this platform gives me.
Miss Lam?
I'm going to add two more things to that. One, of course, is when we're talking about domestic violence.
No, but okay, all right. Then I'll go back to the question. The question is, what would the critical woman's issue that most arouses your passion?
Right. So I'm adding to a little bit of what Mishka said in terms of it's not only the provision of housing for women who need to step away. For a lot of instances, a lot of those women don't step away because they're unable to earn for themselves separately and apart from their husbands or their, intimate partners. And so I've over the years, very quietly, in situations, I've been able to assist in getting, not only women out of certain situations, but I've been able to do so financially, gathering a number of friends together, and we've been able to assist. But we have a critical need at that point to not only be able to get a woman to be able to come out of an abusive relationship, but then to put her on a path that ensures that she stays on that pathway, where she's able to earn for herself, she's able to, get her children out of the situations. I've met at least 4 mothers who ran for their lives and had to leave their children behind, and it was a massive, massive hurdle to just get those children out of, that kind of relationship, especially when the power balance is shifted.
Economic,
Correct.
social, and everything.
So it's not, that is one such issue. And of course the other one is women in leadership roles. We have a number of young girls who we say to them, yes, you can be president. And then they look around and all they're seeing is male politicians or male presidents in that sense. And so one little girl said to me, she says, "You're running to be president of this country?" And I said, "Yes." She's like, she repeated it again. She says, "Guyana?" And I said, "Yes." And the awe on her face. So just the visibility of females in the political realm is another such issue. And like I said earlier, my entire issue is that education of women that will allow them.
Well, I think adding to that,
Yes.
if you look at the amount of graduates from UG, it's predominantly women.
Yes.
But if you look at the board of directors of a given company, it's predominantly men. And why is that so? I think that we need to amend our Equal Rights Act. It says equal pay for equal work, but you can't get equal pay if you don't have equal work. And so you have men holding the executive and the managerial positions. So I think the Equal Rights Act needs to include a provision where there are checks and balances to ensure that women are represented at the higher level. We don't want to be at the clerical level alone. Let's take, for example, GWI. There are 14 directors on that board. Of the 14, only 3 are women. But that's a great amount compared to, let's say, for example, Guy Suko. There are 9 directors. Guess how many are women? 0. They have the secretary to the board is a female, but that's it. So
Right.
it goes beyond, to me, just educating women, because I think that's really not a problem anymore in Guyana, because we do have this. I'm here because I had that access. But the problem is a lot of the women don't have the access to the executive positions, and I can't say that's because they're not equally qualified. So I think something has to be done to equalize or to give us that a good footing in that arena.
Mind you, we also need to step up. We can't just leave it
Yeah,
to chance.
Yeah.
So I've always said to persons, so you complained about it, what are we doing about it?
And you've done
step
something.
in, and I've done something about it. I literally stepped into the ring.
Viewers, I'm not seeing it on the screen, so perhaps I should just mention that the guests on Plain Dog this evening are Ms. Rondha Ann Lam, presidential candidate for Citizenship Initiative, and Ms. Mishka Puran, prime ministerial candidate of Change Guyana. Now, am I being simplistic? Are we being simplistic about women as a whole, or do the issues which face younger women differ from those facing older women, those facing urban women different from rural women, employed versus unemployed?
I would agree there. It's a multifaceted problem, I would say, right? If you go urban women, for example, they're generally more willing to work. I find from going around the country.
Paid work.
Paid work.
Because the rural
Yes.
women work.
Definitely.
When I
Or-
say work, I mean paid work.
Paid work,
and,
yes.
External jobs, so to
Yes,
speak.
they,
Yes.
they have a mindset they want to be out there working, but they have their own setbacks. Their setback is that they don't have daycare facilities for their children. And the cost of daycare is so prohibitive. You might as well stay home. You have 3 children, you pay per child, you earn $60,000, $70,000. It just isn't worth your while to go out there. And these are women who are willing to be trained, willing to further their education, but it's just not something that they can do. Rural women, on the other hand, I find, and this isn't one size fits all, but generally, they're more contented to be home. They have a support base in the sense of they have their extended family willing to look after their children, but the mindset is different. That generally it's the man's place to go out there and work. And I think if we could meet a happy middle where the extended family would help the urban woman, or if we could have, and that's one of the plans that Change Guyana has, is to set up mandatory daycare centers. I mean, the government must be able to provide for its people.
What do you see the broad issue of women, or there are discrete and distinct issues?
For me, the most distinct issue would be that generational gap. When we're talking specifically younger women to older women, as much as Mishka has identified in many instances the divide between women who live in urban centers versus rural centers, I found it more to be, at least in areas I've looked at, it's a generational thing. The older women tend to, they come literally from a different generation. They have, my mother used to say to me, when you get to my age, you'll understand. And then I got to her age and I understood, because now I'm using the same terms as my
Language, yes.
daughter. So for me, it's more of a generational thing. The values that, for instance, my mother would have experienced 40 years ago aren't necessarily always the values that are being now. And so that I find the conflict in that sense comes from the women who've said to us, one woman said to me, you're too plain spoken. You have to learn to speak a certain way. I had my arms exposed the other day, and another lady commented, you can't dress like that. So it's so multifaceted that even among our own women, we have so many different things running all at the same
But
time.
I was asking about the problems which they face.
Okay,
Are they
yes.
generally the same kinds of problems?
I think so. I mean, I think not just the same type of problems with women, it's the same type of problems with men. They're worried about health care and
Educating
their children and being able to afford the simple things in life. I think it's across the board for everyone. I don't think we really separate woman from man and categories of women in terms of their basic needs.
But take the older woman versus the younger woman.
Mhm.
The younger woman is probably single mother kind of thing, probably exposed to some of the social things, drug use. Older women are less likely to be confronting that type of issue. The younger woman probably doesn't have the great economic needs, perhaps, because slightly less responsibilities than the older woman with children.
I haven't really seen like a marked distinction between the older woman's needs and the younger woman's needs. And I think if we look at things like drug use, etc., that's probably more of an urban problem than
A lot of people wouldn't agree with you on that one.
well, from what I've seen.
Okay.
Mhm. It's probably more of an urban problem, and I think it comes from, again, I think it comes from despair that you're a lot of the people who use drugs are generally people who don't have opportunities. They feel that this is the best that they can possibly get within their communities, and they turn to drugs as an escape route. And I don't think necessarily it's a woman's problem, as it more of a society's problem in general.
Anything you would add to that, Isla?
Ultimately, at the end of the day, the concerns, I believe, across the board for the women I've met, they're looking for things like security, not only in terms of economics, but also in the ability, you know, to provide for their children a home, able to own their own homes. I've spoken to at least 3 single mothers within the last week, and one of their greatest wishes is that they're, before the end of the year, they're able to pay off for the land that they've applied for and to start building their homes. So for a lot of the women I've met, and this definitely wasn't an age thing, because it was older and younger. What I found was as they advanced in age, you know, that desperation seemed to have, you know, and they haven't achieved certain things. They're saying to me things like, you know, I feel like time's running out. And I had to say to them, I said, you know, whether you're 40 or 45 or 25 and you achieve a goal you set out to achieve, that was the most critical thing. So for what I saw and in the field, for women it was home security, financial security, the ability to educate their children, and, you know, to be able to allow those children to deal with various things. Like, for instance, one mother, her son is being bullied at school. And she's at a loss as to how to deal with it. And so she approached the school system. And then, you know, they moved one child, they put him in the other class and those kinds of things. But then her son came home with bruises all over his skin. So she's now, you know, when she stepped out, she says, how can I help? What do I do? The system isn't assisting at this point. So how do we do? So to address it and to say that it's a broad-based issue, it depends on who you're talking to and what are their specific needs. But we saw consistent patterns, how they can assist their children. You know, a mother might not be as educated in terms of, I mean, for this new math that's happening now, I as a teacher, I have to go back, and it was like, okay, this is a new procedure. So every mother, every woman has a different need, but there are certain needs that run across, and a lot of it is stability and security.
When you talk about new maths, you don't mean the majority of 65 being 35.
No. That one,
just wanted to clarify that.
That one still
space
remains
age
the
maths.
same.
That's
yes.
space age. Okay.
Yes.
Now, Mishka, you raised this question about the directors.
Yes.
And you're right. With one exception,
Uh-huh.
all public companies in Ghana are led by men, and the boards are dominated by men. Do you think the private sector, the two you mentioned, Kaisuko, you
Yes.
talked about Kaiwa, but do you think the private sector understands the importance of diversity generally and the role of women in particular?
Well, I looked at some of the
Annual reports?
not the annual. I looked at some of the boards, like certain banks, etc., and it's still not where you would ideally want it to be. You know, they have women on their boards, of course, but it's still primarily dominated by men. But I do think that more senior positions, if you look at the private companies, are filled by women.
But not at that high
But
level.
not at the highest level. It's still a problem. But if you look at the government agencies and etc., you'd find even at the middle management, it's more male domination. I think within the private companies, you'd find a lot more women across middle management, but not at the top.
Okay. What's your view?
I could tell you yesterday I went to a meeting and there were 2 women in the room. Myself and the scribe for the organization I met.
The usual model.
And I remember stepping out and saying to, you know, the group, I said, I could feel the masculinity in the room, you know, and then, but then I could also argue that, for instance, in the teaching profession, you are going to find, in that sense, you're going to find a lot of women. So we dominate some fields, and then others we don't. But some strange.
But I was talking about the private sector.
Yes. No, but I'm talking of, this is I work for a private school, so the majority of our staff is female, which means that all of the high positions, from
also
principal, you know, the vice principals, are all women.
Yes.
HODs, things like that, tend to be like that. So ultimately, however, for the private sector, again, it's a stepping up. We can't just say that women are not on the boards thing without actually checking to see if they're actually women who are stepping up and going there. I am always cautious about the fact that my gender does not qualify me for every position just because I'm female. I have to be able to add to the in that sense. But I don't see, like Mishka said earlier, I am not seeing a lot of women, even in the private sector, in high management positions and those kinds of things. Almost every organization that I've met within the last couple of weeks as a presidential candidate, it's all been very testosterone filled. And that's private as well as public. So ultimately, at the end of the day, that is the whole concept of gender and positions and roles and things like that. We're not exactly in the 21st century in terms of those kinds of things. And it starts even within, as Mishka said, even lower levels, supervisors. I remember counting how many women were on boards just generally, and I was at 80-something persons, and I think we barely had about 15 who were women. So on and on and on. It's something that is not only across the government divide or thing. It's just society in general. This is it. Men lead. They're expected to do certain things, and women are expected to follow. And more specifically, I'm seeing this fall back now with young men saying to me, "Miss, I don't want my wife to work." So I'm wondering where that is coming from. And then I asked the question recently, and a child said to me, he says, "Well, Miss, y'all got too much power now,
Wow.
One gentleman, a comment under one of our posts, he said, "No, she can't be president. She's going to jail all the men." So they're still...
Maybe they deserve jailing.
You know?
Yeah. Sorry, you want to say?
I wanted to say, while I agree that sometimes you can attribute it to women not stepping up, we don't have the statistical data available to say that women haven't been stepping up, and this is the reason why women are excluded. So I think that there needs to be more done in terms of regulations to determine what is the cause behind this underrepresentation of women.
Well,
because you can't just say that women aren't stepping up and leave it like that.
It's actually worse than that. The way it works, certainly in corporate life, there's a vacancy on the board. The older male one especially, they decide who they want, who's not going to rock the boat,
Yes.
Right.
and they just select, they handpick, and then you go to the AGM and the AGM rubber stamps. So it's not a question of stepping up; it's a question of being kept down.
Obviously.
We have heard a lot about constitutional change, especially at elections time, and then nothing happens. Can you share with viewers your three most prime areas for constitutional reform, particularly given all the developments that you've seen?
For us, it's that hyper-presidentialism, that kind of broad-based, wide-reaching powers that president has, not only as head of state, but head of government. And so, for me, if I can't investigate and prosecute you as the sitting president for crimes, but then the ordinary man on the street is facing, for a similar situation in the case of where you have a president who has abused his or her powers. So for me, hyper-presidentialism, that is a massive thing for me.
Any others?
The second one, of course, which we've actually proposed is a flip of how the parliamentary seats are currently. As they are, it's 40 for the top up and 25 regional. We want to flip it, and 50 become constituency based, and 15 ultimately move towards that would come from you kind of flip it around, so 15 is top up and now 50. But that 50 is coming from constituencies.
You realize, though, Rhonda, that could create problems for the overall pure proportional representation. There is a problem there. But I agree. We
Yes.
need to
No,
test it.
we actually worked it out. There is literally the formula of how we're going to split it along the regions to keep
Okay.
it proportionate as well. Like for instance, region 4 is actually now it's 7 seats.
That's
But
right.
in the new proportion that we're pushing it, it actually becomes 14. So it's still we still keep that proportionate in terms of how we have it now
Yeah.
in terms of that. It's just that because now you have more seats going to the constituencies or the regions, it's just flipped around
And what's the
in
third
that
one?
sense.
You have a third one?
Yes, and the third one, of course, is some basic rights that we want inscribed. One of it, of course, is that gender and youth equation that we've been talking about. We want to move it towards 40%. Now we have 30%, but not only 30%, we want 40% representation, meaning that every single party that enters parliament has to send in 40% of women. We also want youth inclusion in terms of lists of
All right,
young people.
Let me ask.
Well,
Let me ask.
I
this.
would
You
get
believe
rid-
in that quota system, or you believe in a meritocracy?
I believe in a meritocracy. Why should we have a quota system? But what I would change, if I could be a part of a reform, is get rid of this whole thing that you can't be. I see no reason why you can't be a dual national
Yes.
and run.
You actually
As
have that.
you know, that should be out
Yes.
altogether. I don't see how that hinders your ability to be an effective parliamentarian, an effective prime minister, an effective president. In fact, I think being out of Guyana for a while broadens your exposure to democracy. I think it might be an asset.
Let me
That's
give you
one.
an example. Though. Charandas Prasad
Yes.
Oh dear.
voted at 9 o'clock
Yes.
using his Guyana
Yes.
passport. At 10:30 he leaves, and he's my friend.
Yes.
He's my client.
Yes.
But I'm using it as a principle.
Yes.
Doesn't that suggest that you should not have dual loyalty?
No.
Okay, all right.
No, I
You've
don't-
answered the
I don't
question.
agree.
All right, we'll go on with your other two.
The other one, of course, this whole thing with the executive presidency, it's sort of like you're creating a monarchy. We don't need that. And the third one would be that you can have, I don't think you should have to have a coalition before you go in. I think you should have a coalition after. And I know that's a very heated and debatable issue, but the thing is, when you get absorbed, let's say, for example, I'm not going to call it. You want Party A wants to join Party X. But if Party A, which is the small, Party X is a small company, the small party. If you join in advance, you have absolutely no bargaining power. You're absorbed by the greater party, and you have no voice. But if you're able,
You have a voice. You can always say, "Look, I'm not supporting you. That I'm out."
but you're already in.
Yes, but you can say you're out.
But you're
You're
out.
not permanent. I don't want to
To
say
me,
it's like
I-
marriage.
No, but to me, you have a greater say if the results are out and they need you, and then you can have greater bargaining power to say, look, I will not join forces with you unless you stick to this, this, and this, because they can give you all of the promises, but you've already joined forces. So I think that's what I would, that's the reform that I would want.
Mishka likes a post
Yeah.
election alliance.
Yes.
Racial voting seems entrenched in Guyana. Why do you think your respective parties, Change Guyana and Citizenship Initiative, would be able to break that racial consolidation, and which I may say is not particularly different men from women?
No.
No.
Why do you think you can do it?
I have seen, when we looked at the demographic of voters that TCI wanted to pay attention to, we were looking at swing voters, we were looking at young voters, independent voters, all of the things that, potentially who would be an ideal TCI voter. I have learned, whilst there is that entrenched race voting, there is also a large swath of the population who are quite ready to move away from that. Now, race voting
Is that a hope, or is that you
No,
be
I've
able to
actually-
establish that empirically?
well, we're going to establish that empirically on elections day, but
and you'll
just-
come back and talk about it here.
correct. But one of the things I have I noticed when I went out into the field, I was expecting just for the nominator's signature, I was expecting so much kickback. Persons were going to say, no, 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 no. This is me and I've voted like this for years and I'm not going to change it and you can't get my signature. There were persons like that. But if for every 10 people that I met, if there were 2 people like that, there were 8 who were quite, well, yes, talk to me about it. But race voting and changing it right off the bat is not going to happen now. It's not going to, it's a process that is moving towards this kind of...
You're aware that almost every election in this country has gone in the same direction.
But
that
and
was
there's always
5
been before
years.
elections. No, Rondha, before elections, they always, this is the election going to change the dynamics.
I've never thought
No,
that
no.
till
Okay.
now.
Okay, good.
I think they're more educated. The population is more educated now. We have a younger demographic coming out to vote.
Yes. 70%
It has changed a lot. There are a lot of mixed people in the equation now that don't identify as being either Indo or Afro. And I think now is the time, I mean, even if our parties don't win, now is the time to be there, because within the next 20 to 30 years, Guyana will look very different. And there will be no place for race politics. If you look at the amount of Brazilians and Cubans and Chinese and different races that are coming into the country right now, I think in the next 20 to 30 years, our population you'll look back and see how different our population will be.
But I think there's certainly a time for that discussion.
Yes.
But do you think that's good that Cubans and Venezuelans and Haitians and Brazilians will come and be the decisive voice in our country?
Well, they wouldn't be Cubans, Venezuelans, and they'll be Guyanese at some point by then, right? I'm all open for if we have migration into Guyana for people to be vetted. It's not just anyone crossing the border and coming into Guyana. And Guyanese have been doing this from the time I know myself, going out of the country and seeking
Yes.
better opportunities.
That's
so
true.
we will be very, very hypocritical,
Yeah.
to say the least, to say that we wouldn't allow people who are in need to come into
But the
our
countries
country.
we've gone to, they've had some kind of regulation, if not controls.
Well, we would need the same regulation, but
absolutely the same
But-
realistically speaking, whether I want to agree with them coming or not,
or in
our-
what numbers. It's not whether they come,
Right.
it's on what numbers and
our population demographic will change.
Mhm.
And that's inevitable.
But don't you think as a country, both of you, that we ought to have some kind of policy on these things?
of course,
Absolutely.
And do we have?
no,
We tend to play catch up here.
we don't.
Everything is a catch up. The thing explodes and it happens, and then we're hustling to close the barn door, so to
There's
speak.
too much power
Yeah.
in the ministers to take whatever decisions they want to take. I think we have to have hard and fast laws and regulations,
Criteria.
and a strong vetting process.
This sore question. If oil and gas,
Oh boy.
if elected to parliament, will you advocate for a review of the oil contracts in parliament? And why, for example, is Citizenship Initiative silent on this question?
We have actually not been silent on this question. I have answered this question. It depends to who's asking me, because
And I'm asking you now.
Right. I have publicly stated that yes, we are going to renegotiate the contracts, and there are 2 specific areas that I'm interested in. One, of course, is that lack of ring fencing that exists, the fact that Exxon and all the others could literally transfer costs from a well that isn't working as well. And so they have that 75% up to 75%, and then we're left with that 25%. The other sore point for me is the fact that we as Guyanese people are paying the taxes for these areas. So I have some specific areas that bug me, and it bugs TCI on the whole. So yes, in terms of when it's to renegotiate, yes, absolutely. Those are the areas that I'm.
Mishka, you may have
dealing
read in the
with.
media the
Yes.
other day, ExxonMobil helped to write the cabinet paper
Of course, and
on the
that's
contract. And the second point I'm asking you as a lawyer, this stability clause that say you can't change this contract. No parliament. All y'all can go in as much as you want. You can't change any rights of those companies without compensating them.
Well, we do know about contracts and undue influence, and you have that's one of the basis, a strong basis for setting aside.
Undue influence is a nice legal term. It's bullying.
Yes. So that is and also where the parties are unequal. They're the footing isn't equal. That's another possibility to have it set aside, and as well as I don't want to get into the background of how this
No, we talk
contract
about
might have
what
been.
you will do. What you will do.
Yes, but what I would say that there needs to be if there ever was a COI, it's for this. There needs to be a commission of inquiry as to how we got to this contract. It's very, very shoddy to say.
But
least.
COIs in this country just
No, but not a
put a report and throw it on the
no,
shelf.
not a meaningless COI.
COI.
A real COI. I know I'm very outspoken with that, and Change Guyana has from the beginning said that we will renegotiate that contract. We don't even have a signing bonus. Every other country has gotten a signing bonus. We got $18 million.
Of which 15 is for lawyers.
Is for lawyers. What sense is
Y'all
that?
are doing badly.
And the whole gift. It was a gift.
And it's crazy. So, of course, that contract has to be renegotiated and reviewed.
I know neither of you is an economist, but the economy is likely to become, for a while, almost totally dependent. We're going to be overshadowed by oil revenues. That will lead to the Dutch disease, where they're crowding out by oil of all the other sectors. It can lead to the resource curse, where politicians misuse the oil resources and destroy the political system more. How do we avoid this?
Well, you have to invest whatever money we get into the other sectors. Guyana has only until recent started relying on oil, but we always have been rich in other areas, in agriculture, in bauxite, in gold. We have so many resources. So the old people will tell you, don't put all your eggs in one basket, and that's for a specific reason. Spread the wealth out across the different areas and invest your money.
You remember President Granger described those very sectors as the curses? You remember that?
Well, I don't wish to really.
No, I'm asking if you remember that.
I remember that. But you know what? I think with proper management, we can utilize our resources, we can invest, and we can not be completely oil dependent. We don't want to end up being Nigeria.
What's your party's position on this?
We have actually looked at all of the other areas which we want to focus on. I've said repeatedly that all I'm hearing is oil, oil, oil. What are you going to do with this oil money? What are you going to do with oil? And my position has always been, and after oil, what? When you ramp up this spending, when this Dutch disease takes over, and whilst we've made a lot of steps, for instance, in the last year, we have policies, we don't have laws in place. So, yesterday when we had that lauded local content policy, you can't enforce policy if you don't have an actual law. So, for instance, the Petroleum Commission bill is still sitting there in Parliament. So what are you enforcing in that sense? And then the other aspect, of course, is everybody is thinking, one of the greatest things that in all of my reading on oil and, Dutch disease and third world countries and how we approach certain things, it was the idea that the population is expecting certain things, and if they don't get it, they feel a certain way. And I kept thinking, well, what are they expecting? But because we've lauded this oil as the savior of everything, and I know for a fact, gold hasn't saved us, rice hasn't saved us. So why do we feel that this oil is going to literally be the saving grace when everything in our history has taught us that we have not only not only benefited from our resources in that sense, but also at the same time, how do we avoid this Dutch disease? And what you're going to have to do is to literally ensure that there's some investment going on with some of that money, but you're going to have to pay extra attention to all the other industries that are not going to.
You know, if you take, and one, I know it's probably Singapore is probably overused as an example.
Yes.
It is not how much resources you have,
It's what you do
but
with it.
rather how you use
Yes.
even the limited resources you have.
And that has been our plight for as long as I can remember.
And oil can in fact make it worse.
Misappropriation and mismanagement. Those are the two plagues that we need to get rid of.
So you two courses, not six, as Granger said.
No, it boils down to two.
Well, it comes down to the people who's in charge, and ultimately at the end of the day it comes down to our checks and balances in terms of governance systems as well.
We started by talking, this program is Women in Politics. It's Miss Rondha Ann Lam, presidential candidate of Citizenship Initiative, and Miss Kapuran, Prime Ministerial candidate of Change Ghana. How do you rate, as a woman's issue, as a people's issue, as a human rights issue, the way the sugar industry and 7,000 employees and their families have been treated?
That was handled terribly from the position of what we knew was coming, and it was coming for years in terms of that reduction of that EU preferential treatment. We had no plan for those sugar workers.
Well, I don't want to interrupt you, but you
Yes.
remember there was a commission of inquiry. I don't know whether there's a distinction between a real one and I don't know.
Because
was a
nothing
commission-
came out of it, so
Yes.
what's the point of
Well-
having it?
Well, the fact is that commission of inquiry made no recommendation as what we saw. So I'm asking you, in the context of women and poverty and children and all of that, what's your view on how the government treated the sugar industry? And is there any parallel, any precedent in Ghana for that large scale?
Well, I think that the sugar industry was dying for a long time, and no one was being forthright with the people that this is not a profitable enterprise, this is not something that we can sustain. But what they should have done before completely phasing out people and leaving them jobless is find another sector, invest the money instead of trying to revive something that's dead. They should have taken that money and put it in some other industry, perhaps some other form of agriculture, planting.
So you would scrap the sugar industry
I would not.
because you said it's dead.
I wouldn't. Well, the parts that are dead already, because what they were doing was trying to bring back the estates that couldn't function, trying to push into Skeldon and all those areas. I would try to, over a while,
got
phase it
one
out.
minute
I would
left.
phase it out, but not brashly bring an end to it, what we have existing right now. I'd phase it out eventually because it's not profitable, but not without giving them a
But I want to ask you, and you're going to respond to this. Should you judge an industry only on profit or its economic contribution to a country?
Ultimately, for me, the sugar industry is neither black nor white. It isn't. It's so many gray areas all tied up all in one that you have to look at the idea of how do we. These are Guyanese. These are moms. These are dads. These are families, and so the sugar industry. It's a ticklish subject for me because it's neither black nor white, and so we didn't do certain things. And so it escalated to certain points, but ultimately at the end of the day, I can't remember a precedent for this kind of.
Speaking to persons.
We got just 30 seconds.
Speaking to cane cutters, I don't think it's something they want for the rest of their lives. A lot of them told me that, they feel like it's modern day slavery. So I think that some system at any point, in any case, needs to go there to phase out cutting cane and to give Guyanese people a better quality of life. And I don't think that better quality of life necessarily comes from cutting
Last
cane.
comment from you on anything.
Well, ultimately, at the end of the day, we are looking forward to an election that is literally game changing in terms of all those brand new faces that are, will be going into Parliament. And so ultimately, I'm looking forward to sitting next to Mishka in that new Parliament.
And you can see that when women work together, we don't fight and
I was going to say that.
we were able to feed off of each other, right?
Ms. Rondha Ann Lam, presidential candidate of Citizenship Initiative, Mishka Puran, prime ministerial candidate of Change Ghana. Thank you so very much. The last two persons from different political parties. This was almost a slanging match. I wouldn't call their names.
Oh boy.
Good luck to you and your parties in the elections. Operators and viewers, thank you and good night. I hope you found this program interesting and educating as well. Until next week, see you.